You're watching World Championship Wreckage, brought to you by Rivet City Radio and the World Championship Wreckage YouTube page. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Today's episode, the managers of WCW. Did you know some were romantically involved?
A girlfriend. Boy, if you got any closer, you'd be behind her.
Bret Hart, what do you think about all this?
Jay never ceases to amaze me. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of World Championship Wreckage. After a little bit of hiatus, I know I'm not feeling like I'm dying anymore. I'm actually over all the crud that I had last week. So we missed a week, but we're making up for it. Joined today, as always, my buddy next to me, even though he's wearing that Tennessee hat, as always. I don't fault him for that. My buddy from Botch and Chair Shots over on Rivet City Radio, the Will Gray. And in our guest seat today from Wrestling with the Truth, BC Hunter. Gentlemen, how you guys doing today? And thank you for being here. We got some fun stuff to talk about today.
Doing great. Thanks for inviting me on. Really excited about this.
It's going to be fun. Will, how are you, my man?
It's been fun. I've had a weekend, that's for sure. I'm excited to get, this is very few points in people's lives where they're like, I'm glad it's Monday. But this was a very family-centric weekend, and I'm glad I was there to help out. But I'm really glad to be here talking about wrestling again. I'm glad to be back.
Home in my safe space. All the goodness around me.
With all my toys and everything. This is where I'm supposed to be.
Touching the walls, like this is my safe zone. This is my all is well right here. So we got some business before we launch into the episode. As always, please like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. We appreciate all the support as always. You can, of course, follow us on of course, you're watching us here on YouTube. You can also find us over on Twitter, where we do our polls every week. WC Wreckage Pod. You can also search on TikTok, World Championship Wreckage. We've got a page on there where we post clips. And something that Will doesn't even know about yet that I'm going to announce.
Surprises.
Surprises. I got coming out the woodwork. I've got one I haven't even told you about, but I don't know if we have time for me to show you. I have to show you off camera. Our buddy Jay Knows Wrestling, our wonderful producer, he is going to be doing a giveaway when we hit 50 subscribers on YouTube. And we're not that far away. I think at this point, we only need like 14 or 13 more subscribers to hit that, that big milestone of the first 50. And what he's going to be giving away is the Walmart exclusive 3-pack NWO Funko Pops.
Well, that's cool.
He's going to be giving that away. All you've got to do is make sure that you are subscribed to our page on YouTube. Yep.
Not that one.
I was like, am I eligible to win? He told me no, because I want that 3 set. I was like, but that doesn't mean my wife can't enter, because she follows the page too.
My 7 burner accounts.
Hey, there are no burners account on mine following it. I'm trying to be as up with this YouTube channel as I can be. All you got to do. So make sure you're subscribed here on World Championship Wreckage on our YouTube channel. And then make sure you go on any of our videos, and all you have to do is comment NWO for life, and that'll put you into the drawing. And as soon as we hit 50, we'll throw it in one of those random wheel things, and a winner will be chosen. You get that wonderful 3-pack NWO Funko Pop, courtesy of our producer, Jay Knows Wrestling. But let's get going, Will. You won the topic. You're in charge tonight. Let's talk to managers.
I'm gonna throw it out here. I think we're tied 3-3 now, right? Did I make my comeback, or are you still? Is it 4-3?
We really need to write this down at some point.
I'm just trying to make sure. I know I was trailing for a couple weeks. You had a couple 2 or 3 wins in a row, and I remember we're still holding off on one of mine because we're waiting for the guest. But I was like, I had to figure it out in my head. We need to write it down so we can keep a scoreboard. Get Jay to put one up in the corner.
I think we're tied with doing World War III next.
Okay.
I think that ties us. But we'll do some math and we'll figure it out.
All right. When you think about wrestling, you think about the things that help tell the story that you're watching in the ring. You've got the competitors, you've got the ref, you've got the crowd, the venue, the stories, and everything that have built up to a very essential part of that is throughout wrestling history. We've had managers and valets, what these people have been. They've been big and small and round. They've been all different types of people, different shapes and sides and creeds and colors and nationalities. But what they've always kind of represented and been that symbol of is that, to steal a Paul Heyman term, they're kind of an advocate. You know what I mean? They're there to put the star over. So I'm going to kind of start with one of those softballs. Let's get the conversation rolling question. Like, BC, what roles do you think a manager plays in the story they're telling in the ring?
The managers, to me, is their whole role is to get their guys over, or girls, whoever they're managing, without getting themselves over. They're to bring attention and they're supposed to work the crowd when the crowd is down a bit, so they can get the crowd riled up, bring attention to their wrestler, and then just fill in some of those down times, and when needed, take a bump or two that helps get the good guy over as well. So it's all a combination. It's all a dance, right? And they play that pivotal part in the dance of filling in those gaps when the wrestlers in the ring need to take a break.
DadHat, what about you?
Yeah, the same thing that BC said. I mean, they play such a vital role. And it's when I think about managers, whether it be in WCW, whether it be in WWF, WWE, whatever you want to call it now, I always go to heel managers. Yes, there are a few babyface managers that stick out, Elizabeth to Macho Man, but that was a different dynamic because you had a heel wrestler but a babyface manager, which was an interesting kind of combination with that. But I mean, yeah, helping drive that story, helping to be that person that is like almost like that asterisk on them, that like, if there's something that maybe they're missing, that asterisk helps fill in that space, whether it be a mouthpiece, whether it be, someone who, like, they're great in the ring, but maybe they don't know how to really work the crowd other than being a technician. And just being what that person needs to get them to that next level. And yeah, being able to take a good bump never hurts a manager.
The infamous shoot fall for Corny off of the scaffold match in '86 or whatever. We are historically known. We're WCW, the World Championship Wreckage. We specifically like to feature the WCW era of wrestling in this. But I'm going to ask you guys a question going into our list that BC and I worked on. Like, who are some of your favorite managers of all time? Not necessarily WCW exclusive. I'm pretty sure BC and I are going to have some of the same ones on our list. But like, when you think of your all-time greats, who are they?
Well, for me, I mean, I guess if you want to talk about the Mount Rushmore, it all begins and ends with Bobby Heenan. I mean, number one of all. Jim Cornette, of course, being on there. After that, I mean, you could throw. There's so many that are on that borderline, but you get somebody like a Paul Heyman, even though he's an advocate as opposed to a manager.
He's a manager.
Yeah, I know. I argue sometimes with myself, do I want to throw J.J. Dillon on there? Because he was more like the caboose to this great steam engine that was just rolling along, but he played a part. I was, it's funny, when I was putting the list together today, I actually realized J.J. could arguably be the predecessor to Heyman as an advocate, because he wasn't like a bumping fool manager. He was kind of like that advocate in there, and that was the role that maybe sparked Heyman to do that type of thing, whereas you had, Cornette bumping over the place, Heenan bumping over the place and stuff like that. And then if, another one that popped into my mind was Baby Doll was another great one from that era. That
Absolutely.
Just heat magnet for sure for a guy like Tully. So the complete opposite of Elizabeth, where she could take care of herself. She didn't mind being a heel, right? So those are a few that jump off the mind. I've got a ton of them listed down. It was tough to whittle down the top 10, but yeah, those are some of the top ones.
DadHat, put you on the spot, man. Your turn.
Yeah, I mean, Heyman and now I'm blanking. We literally just said his freaking name.
JJ?
No, commentator. I'm sorry.
Bobby Heenan.
Heenan, thank you. I was about to say Heenan, the Heenan family. And that would have jogged my memory. But Heenan and Heyman, to me, they're like the two sides of a coin. because they to me they just mirror each other at times so well. Like almost sometimes I say same person, different generations, even though they did overshadow some just a little bit. Sherri Martel, for sure. And it might just be because I am from the South, the mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart.
Yeah.
Have to. He was funny, and he was, I don't know, he was always very, like, I liked him as a heel with like Hart Foundation and WWF, but I liked him as like a baby face with Hogan at the start of WCW, and then he turned and went to Dungeon of Doom and all that kind of stuff. But those are some big ones for me. I mean, you've got your Colonel Robert Parkers, you've got your like you said, your baby dolls, and Elizabeth. I mean, Elizabeth to me is I don't know, like she's like the first manager I remember seeing and being like getting my attention. But I was also a huge Macho Man fan, so that's probably why. But yeah, those are some big ones for me.
You guys pretty much said everything I need to. Heenan, Heyman, Cornette. James E was number 2 for a long time. Heyman passed him, and if Heyman continues to be the dominant force he is in wrestling, Heyman may very well retire the greatest manager of all time, but I still think he's got some climbing to do behind Heenan. It's a great way to start because we've got a couple lists, and what we're going to do is kind of plow through them. We're going to talk about our favorite managers from WCW. And the beautiful thing about World Championship Wrestling is the precursor to it in JCP and everything that built up to it. BC, I would have loved to have you here for the opening episode when we talked about the buyout and everything, Black Saturday, everything that built to what became WCW. But when you look at it, you've got everything in JCP and the territories, the precursor building into WCW. Then afterwards, you've got that little bit of gray area, that 2001 to 2003 or 4 after the invasion, where WCW is still a thing, but it's not the WCW of old. So it's got a rich history. So I'm just going to dive right in. Number 10 on my list is Elizabeth. When you look at her specifically in WCW, you can look at the mega powers and everything she did in, WWE in Connecticut. But for me, when I put her on this list, I want to specifically kind of look at what she was able to do to develop herself in that kind of second wind or second act in WCW, the heel turn at Super Brawl 6, like everything. She kind of came into her own. She was never a fabulous talker by any means, which you would think of. She was definitely that quintessential valet. And when she kind of had her heel turn and kind of got that bad side to her, it made a beautiful woman hot. You know what I mean? Like when she was in WWE, she was beautiful. The whole ripping her skirt off thing at SummerSlam, like all of that. She was that really classy, beautiful woman. And after her heel turn and she got that edge, she just, you know what I mean? It raised Elizabeth to 11 when she became a bad guy. So what do you guys think about Miss Elizabeth?
Look at who she had in WCW just in that time frame. Of course, Randy Savage. You got to include him. Ric Flair and Lex Luger. I mean, she was involved, and of course she's in with the NWO. There were some times she was with Bischoff and everything, but everything and everyone that she was involved with is either a Hall of Famer or a future Hall of Famer. There's no just, okay, she was with this person, and okay, that was just a dark time in her managing career. She's Hall of Fame, just like, everybody she was with.
Yeah, for me, she was just outside my top 10. If this was WWF, I'd probably throw her in the top 10, but only because I went. You're gonna laugh as I leaned a lot of old school on mine. So shocker, the guy who does an '80s channel does old school, but she would be like that in that honorable mention section for me, because for me she just resonates so much with me for the WWF Elizabeth with Macho Man, and just I love the fact that she just brought class to that position the whole time, and that dichotomy, like you mentioned earlier, Justin, with the whole heel with the babyface manager, and she wasn't in power. She was the damsel in distress, and it brought a little bit of weakness to Macho Man that was needed for that wild man character. And also, but it made it likable, that whole package that you had as well. But again, there's no putting down Elizabeth. She was, one of the, key people of the 80s and 90s as far as valet or manager, whichever you want to call her.
Absolutely. Who you've got in the 10 spot on your list, BC?
So I begrudgingly at number 10 because I was never a fan of this guy, and I always found his group to be a little kooky because when I first got introduced to him was back in the 80s when I think he was just embroiled in a lifelong feud with Jimmy Valiant and everything got kind of crazy at that point. But Paul Jones is my number 10, the Paul Jones Army. But when you look at his career span, because I'm currently doing a little Mid-Atlantic 82-83 run right now, and you can see where he transitions from wrestler to manager. The guys that he had in his stable were pretty impressive. I mean, all you think of during that 85 run with Jimmy Valiant is all the stupid tuxedo and hair versus hair matches and hair versus beard and Shaska Watley and all these guys. But I mean, he had Abdullah the Butcher. He had, Greg Valentine, just a murderer's row of people, the Powers of Pain, all kinds of different guys. And he was a fixture in the 80s in JCP and Mid-Atlantic. So I got to give him credit, and I'll put him at number 10 for mine.
Yeah, I'll echo everything you just said about the man. When you look at that was kind of the heyday for the territories in a lot of ways, especially leading into 83 and Black Saturday when all the TV stuff happened. But when you look at the who's who, a lot of times Paul Jones, when he slides in at your 10 spot, he's one of those guys where it's like, when you look at who he was competing with and around in those territories, because at that same time over in Memphis, you had your Jimmy Harts and stuff. So it's not that, it's not a 1 or a 2 or an A and a B. It's like a 1 and a 1A a lot of times with these really talented guys. And especially when you look at somebody, because Jones had one of those seamless transitions. Some guys have issues when they stop working and they're not sure what to do with their hands. You know what I mean? But he seemed to really have that good transition over into management, into the backstage roles and stuff like that. DadHat, you got anything to throw in on Paul Jones?
No, I mean, he's one of those that I think that a lot of people don't think about a lot of times, and I think that they need to go back and just revisit. You said that, I was like, man, I haven't thought about Paul Jones in forever.
Nobody does.
No, it's just like, but now I'm just thinking about different things, and I'm like, yeah, now I'm like, okay, where's my notepad? I need to be writing this down, like things that people say in podcasts. I'm like, I need to go back and rewatch this, I can write that. But yeah, Paul Jones, go back and rewatch it, folks, if you don't have it or have never seen it, because it's fun stuff.
Number 9 on my list, Paul Ellering. When it comes to a guy when you think of what a manager does in the real world, they handle your affairs and make sure everything stays in line. Paul Ellering was one of the few guys maybe on the entire list who was an actual manager at that point in the territories and leading into WCW especially. He was really responsible for handling the Road Warriors, Hawking Animals, their affairs, their booking, their travel arrangements, down to like how much they were getting paid on indie shows, like everything. He handled all of their affairs. And on top of that, you kind of look at the fact that Animal, not so much, but Hawk, he needed that mouthpiece, and he would hit you with those promos, and he would help topple the guys. And he was that mouthpiece when they needed him, and he could also just be that menacing presence when he didn't have to be speaking. DadHat, you got anything to throw in on Paul Ellering? We'll let you tee off this next one.
He was just always, to me, like as badass as the Road Warriors were. If you're going to have somebody in your corner, you've got to have someone just as badass that, like, if the Road Warriors can kick somebody's ass, the manager's got to be able to too. And I always thought, like, Paul Ellering could do it. And, like, I don't know, he just looked menacing. He fit the part. Like, I don't know. He was so just encompassing when I would see him on my television screen. Like, I was just like, you just look like you're a member of the Hells Angels, or you're a member of a motorcycle gang. Like, you just look like you do this job. These are your boys, and you're going to make sure that they're going to be taken care of, and they're going to get to the top, and you're going to do anything you can to get them to the top. He was cool. He was just always very cool to me.
BC, what you got on Paul Ellering, sir?
Yeah, well, he's on my list for sure. You guys both hit the nail on the head. Like, Will, with the fact that he was real, that he was actually their manager, and they were quite open about that, about Paul handling everything. The fact that he was tough looking and sinister looking and stuff like that, and the fact that he could pull off that he could control these two crazy men as well. I mean, Hawk and Animal, just crazy. And you had Hawk with his growl and popping off the neck chain with his flex, and then Animal, tell him Paul, and then Paul just brings all this like big words that you never heard before as a kid, and he's talking about this stuff, but you just know that he is the mastermind just manipulating these two guys to do his bidding type of thing. And then don't forget about the Legion of Doom prior to this, when it was King Kong Bundy in there and Jake the Snake and stuff like that. So this guy has an impressive resume as far as managerial skills.
And look at him. I mean, his last big thing he did with AOP and everything.
Yeah,
I believed he was perfect for them. I loved him with them in NXT.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of those guys who did well with the transition. Like he was able to evolve with wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
BC, number 9.
Yeah, my number 9. I'd like to put this person higher, but there's just so many good people that you got to put above them. But this person jumped off the screen, and I loved when she was on the screen. It's Woman. Just
also on my list.
Oh man, I'm still I'm doing, of course, the Monday Night War on my podcast. So I'm watching all this stuff and I'm watching clip her, just in interviews when it's Mean Gene at ringside with the Horsemen. I mean, you got Flair going around like a madman. You got Iron, you got all these different people, and you cannot take your eyes off of her when she's on the screen. She's just staring a hole through you. In the screen. But I remember back when she first came in as Robin Green with Rick Steiner, and then she's managing Doom, and just the whole idea of her managing Doom was just so cool, such a cool dichotomy there. And just Woman was always one of my favorite valets. Just her look, just the presence that she had, and just there was just, you knew that she was trouble, yet you wanted to get involved in that trouble. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I wrote down my big notes for Woman when she went from the adoring fan to the backstabbing, like, she was manipulative. She was very much like I was giving Elizabeth her roses. You know what I mean? She went from being that very classy lady to being this hardened, heel manager. And I feel like Woman was also that way. She had these, when she first came in, she was Steiner's. She was she was honestly like a stalker, right? Like that's the way they put it across, was that this woman was obsessed with him. She eventually became his manager and his valet, and then she turned her back and the heel turn happened. And then you look at everything else that goes into who she was. She is definitely on my list, so I'll save a little bit for that, but absolutely you can't talk about this without talking about Woman.
Well, just think about the fact that she's on screen with her, Elizabeth, and Deborah McMichael, and you got your eyes on her the whole time. That's pretty impressive, right?
Very, very, very.
DadHat, you got any opinions on Woman?
Oh, absolutely. Woman might have been slightly responsible for a young DadHat's going through puberty. BC hit it the best. Like, all those people on screen, your attention goes to her. Yeah. Like, she was captivating. She would, like, I work in the theater world as well and everything. And there are just some people, whether they have one line in the show, whether they have no lines in the show, or maybe they're the lead. But regardless of what they're saying, what they're doing, your attention goes to them. And that was her. That was her. No matter who she was with, Woman got your attention.
Agreed. All right. And that 8 spot. The guy I threw in my 8 spot, he was on one of those like lists, and I moved him up and down and moved it around when I was putting it together. It's Gary Hart. He's a lot like Paul Jones, where he was kind of, I don't want to say he was lost in the shuffle, but there was a lot of really good managers at that point. But the thing that made Hart special was they would attach him with wrestlers that they would bring in from outside territories. Abdullah the Butcher used Gary Hart to get over. You look at Cowboy Bob Orton, had Gary Hart for a little while. When they brought Great Muta over from Japan, they attached him to Gary Hart. This man was present and there for so many cool stories, but he's one of those guys where it was like, kind of like Creed Bratton in The Office, where he's always there. He's a key focal point in everything, but he's
As I
always
wear
just
the
kind
shirt.
of in the background. You know, I'm a huge Office guy. I'll figure out
Yeah.
a way to work it in there. But
Yeah.
he's one of those guys where he was stable and consistent in the business. And in the chef world, you know, they say consistency is death because, you know, if you grow consistent, people will get bored with your food. But in pro wrestling, if you can have a consistent career as long as Gary Hart did, it's hard not to be one of the, you know, and at least mentions in people's top 10. So Gary Hart's in my number 8 spot. BC, Justin, you guys got anything on Senor Hart?
I'll hold off on Gary because he's in my list soon too.
Okay,
But
okay.
All I can say about Gary Hart is kabuki, brother.
Yeah, he's just like you said. I mean, he had so many different people that he managed and everything. And when you're looking at managers, there's different ways you can kind of look at it, in my opinion, to say that they were a successful manager. Somebody that had just, you know, a core group of people. That's who they were always with. Or you've got somebody that a company believed in enough that they would throw that manager with that wrestler and have multiple to get them to the next level. Okay, cool. You're old reliable. We'll throw you with Gary Hart. Like Gary Hart's our old reliable. Once you get to a point, Gary's off you. Gary will get somebody else. Like he's just that old reliable. Consistency is what I think of with him.
BC, number 8.
Number 8 for me, again, another female manager. And I have to admit, I had a crush on her right from day one, seeing her in the AWA and all the way through. I don't care if they called her Scary or whatever they called her, but Sherri Martel, man, my little crush, Sherri Martel.
Absolutely.
Loved her.
Oh,
Loved her in the WW. Like her with Savage was just magic. But then they throw her in with Harlem Heat. What a great combination. A little run with Flair as well. Her stuff with Robert Parker was so comedic. She was so physical. She just wasn't afraid to get involved in the match. She could take bumps like any male wrestler, and all the guys had respect for her. She got attention, but she didn't take it away from her wrestler as well. And just overall, she was just amazing. If I was going to be starting a federation, I had to pick one heel female manager. It's going to be Sherri Martel that I'm putting on my roster.
She's a little bit higher up on my list. So I'm going to respectfully pass over to DadHat because I do love me some Sherri Martel. She's not too many spots higher than where we're at, but she's coming on my end.
Yeah, so since I was feeling like dying last week, I don't have a top 10. But if I had a top 10, Sherri Martel would probably be very comfortably in my number 3 spot. I love Sherri Martel. Everything she did from Harlem Heat, I don't know. She just fit Harlem Heat so well in WCW. But like you said, the comedic aspects with Robert Parker and everything that added to it. But the fact that she got physical and didn't mind, she didn't look timid, she didn't look like she was scared she was going to get hurt. She'd do whatever. And that's why I love her so much. Like, she's one of those that, like, if she was around today, I would love to see who you would put her with in today's climate, like who she would do well with.
I'd love to see her mix it up with the women's rosters in the ring because she was one hell of a wrestler too.
True.
Yeah.
Agreed. Like I said, she's a little bit up on my list, so I'll get to my 2 cents on Sherri. 7 on mine is Theodore Long. You're going one-on-one with the Undertaker, playa. And Teddy Long. Teddy Long is one of those guys. You know, when you look at, he's one of those guys who have longevity, man. Like that's such a feature in my list is because a lot of the guys, it was either they had great careers for a really long time or they touched so many superstars. And Teddy Long is one of those guys where he has both. You know what I mean? He took over with Doom and led them to the tag titles after Woman. He had a chance to put the Skyscrapers together when what he saw in Vicious. And then when Sid got injured, he was very in the mix of bringing a young Texas Red up, you know what I mean? And getting Mean Mark Callis up to WCW into the Skyscrapers. He helped mold him on the road. So there's a lot of ways where if you look at Teddy Long's places throughout history and you remove him from wrestling, we might not necessarily, we would probably still get The Undertaker. I'm not saying that, Mark, he's a genius. The Undertaker is one of the greatest stories of all time. But when you think about the fact that, like, what if Teddy Long wasn't so vocal about getting him called up to WCW? You know what I mean? What if those and then you look at what he did at SmackDown and everything and all these key focal points. Without Teddy Long, wrestling would still be here, but it would definitely be a little less entertaining without Theodore Long.
Absolutely. I discovered Teddy Long, like my thoughts of Teddy Long are so in the wrong order. Like, I discovered him and realized like him as a referee. And then as I got older and doing more research, I'm like, wait a minute. That's the referee from WCW and he's a manager. Okay, manager, but this is okay, so he was a manager first. So it's like I was all over the place. And then of course getting into WWE and everything he did there, and playa, and let's have a tag team match and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, he did everything in the business.
Yeah. So for me, like, I shut my brain off as soon as the WCW ended, right? So I wasn't counting anything in the post WCW era. So like, I'm not taking into account Paul Heyman stuff that he's done in ECW and all that stuff, but Teddy Long is in my honorable mentions. He didn't quite make my list. It was either going to be him or Paul Jones, and one other guy I'll mention later on. But but talk about a guy that's paid his dues. He started off. You watch the World Championship Wrestling from 84, 85. You see Teddy Long there collecting the jackets from the guys and bringing them back to the dressing room, just hanging around the product. He's the ultimate guy, just hung around the product. He would go fetch sodas for Dusty Rhodes, and finally they say, you know what, let's make him a referee. And so then he became a referee, and then they said, well, let's run an angle with Teddy, and then they ran an angle, and then he becomes a heel manager, and it's just a guy that just hung around, absorbed, stuck in there, and then kept rising up. So kudos to Teddy Long for what he's made of a career of himself, and to this day he's still giving back to wrestling on the independent circuit. So it's all cool stuff with Teddy.
Who you got in the 7 spot, sir?
So number 7 is Gary Hart for me.
Okay, we were close there. We were close.
If you're going to take his whole scope of his career, he would probably be higher on the list. But if we just go WCW, really, he had a little bit of a run in Georgia Championship Wrestling, and then he had the 89 run with NWA, right? And but any man who's going to bring the Great Muta into NWA is on my list for sure, because that was fantastic. Mm-hmm. The whole J-Tex thing, having Terry Funk involved, having Hiro Matsuda and feuding with the Horsemen and all that stuff. He had a great run in 89. He had Buzz Sawyer as well, trying to keep but what I loved about him, and I'm watching a lot of World Class, so I'm getting a taste of Gary Hart for sure right now, but just the fact that he, again, was so sinister. Like, when he was on a microphone, you're like, God, this guy gives me the creeps. And he's going to he always had that foreign menace that he was going to sick on the world and take out your most favorite good guy. But it turns out he was actually like the nicest guy in professional wrestling. Nobody has a bad word about the guy, But yeah, he was great. And everybody talks about his promos and stuff, and how if you close your eyes, you can even tell like if he's black, white, or whatever. But he was just amazing on the promos, and just great, sinister guy who always brought in somebody for your top face to go against.
Agreed. We have similar taste. I figured there would be a lot of overlap on our list, and there are. Not in the right order, but similar list from top to bottom for the most part. I already gave my spill on Gary. DadHat, you got anything else to throw in on Mr. Hart before we jump into that number 6 spot?
Nope. Let's keep going.
Number 6, Colonel Robert Parker. The Robert Parker, the Fuller family, when you look at what that is, it's one of those historic, families in wrestling or whatever. But he was really responsible. He brought Sid Vicious back. He kind of helped carry a lot of it, but one of the reasons I put Robert Parker on here is because of the same reasons I was talking about, with these guys touching young superstars that helped shape them into who they were later. And at this point in both Robert Parker's career and in WCW, they had a young, blonde guy named Stunning Steve Austin. And the Colonel helped lead Stunning Steve to his first singles title as the U.S. heavyweight champion. And to me, it kind of shows you what he can do, because he took somebody who, granted, Stunning Steve and Stone Cold were very, very different people, But when you talk about guys who have an eye for the business, he was one of those guys. So he could see people and help shape them and help move them. And like I said, that's a very focal point of my list all the way through it, is the managers that helped create. Maybe they didn't have the best runs in WCW, but the people they touched while they were there went on to be some of the biggest stars in the world. So my number 6, Colonel Robert Parker.
Yeah, I mean, great pick. I mean, I love Colonel Robert Parker. Just that whole run at, like I say, with Sherri. Some questionable stuff of how he was going to originally be the manager of Harlem Heat that we won't get into, but but yeah, I mean, just he's a character, and I love characters in wrestling. We need more characters,
especially as a manager.
Yes, yes. He shouldn't be a cool badass. He needs to be a character that you're just like, gotta hate that guy,
Yeah.
And that's what he did, and he did it well. I mean, think about it. The guy's like 6'8" or something like that. He should not be managing. He's just towering over all of his guys, but he pulled it off with just that crazy Southern character. And I'll always go for a Southern character. That's always it belongs in wrestling. You need that in wrestling, right?
Yeah.
DadHat, what you got on the Colonel?
Just comedy, man. I think of Robert Parker, and it's just comedy and everything. That's my favorite thing ever with him is him and Sherri. I mean, that like I could just watch clips of those two forever, and it's just I'll be entertained. Him and Jeff Jarrett, of course. I mean, whether it's Colonel Robert Parker or it's Colonel, what was his other name that he went by?
Oh yeah, in WWF, you mean?
Yeah.
God.
It's gonna.
Yeah.
I'll think of it once we in the episode. But he was just always, I don't know. And again, it's that being a character, which is missing from today, just like BC said. Like that was a dude, playing a role, again, coming from a theater background, like that. I mean, there might be some aspects of him in that, but that's not really him. As a little kid and everything, I just remember just being like, "Hey, it's the KFC guy."
Tennessee Lee, that's what he was.
Tennessee Lee.
Yeah. Number 6 for you, sir.
Okay, so this one probably is going to blow your doors off, Will, on how high I've got him. Because technically, if I think about it, he could be number 4 on my Mount Rushmore of all time, but I'm just going with his WCW stuff. But it's Jimmy Hart, of course.
Wow.
Because of course, if you put into play his Memphis stuff, he's one of the greatest managers of all time. If you add in his WWF stuff, he's one of the greatest managers of all time. But I would call his run in WCW a little bit mediocre. I mean, he's tied up with a Hulk Hogan that's definitely not over with the fans at this point. He's tied up with the Dungeon of Doom. Like, that's just, I mean, his best run was probably with Luger as Luger's manager at that time. And then he just kind of faded off in the sunset. Now, he did contribute to WCW in a huge way with all the music that he helped produce for them, stuff like that. But as far as comparing manager versus manager, and when you see my top 5, I mean, it's hard, to argue with that. But in the overall span of thing, just for the stuff he did in Memphis alone, I could put him on the Mount Rushmore of managers. So but as WCW, I'm going to go with him at number 6.
DadHat, I'll let you tee off on Hart if you want. He is on my list a little bit higher than 6. I'm sure BC probably saw that one coming as a kid from Tennessee.
Oh yes.
I figured that too. I'm like, where's Jimmy Hart going to be in Will's list? Probably, I say at least top 4.
Oh yeah, he's in my top 4.
Okay.
He might be number 1.
Jimmy, I agree with everything that BC said. Like, you look at overall career, clearly could be Mount Rushmore. WCW is just kind of he's there. He's there for he's the streamers to Hogan. He's the mouth of the South. He's the mouthpiece for Hogan. Because even though Hogan can quote unquote talk in that old school yelling wrestling style, Jimmy Hart adds that just a little bit of color to Hogan. Dungeon of Doom is a death sentence. Just mentioning Dungeon of Doom. Luger, like you said, Luger is probably the best thing he did. But he's just, I don't know, he was just kind of there. And I can't honestly tell you pinpoint when he stops being there. Like, I just remember him being there. I remember that. I remember the turn on Hogan, where he hits Hogan with the belt at Halloween Havoc after the monster truck, the Yeti and all that. And then it's just like, he's just disappears
Mhm.
in my mind. So I don't know if I'd have in WCW. I don't know if I'd have him in my top 5, but overall, yeah, like looking at everything.
All right. Well, we're here. We're in the top 5 now. Okay. So from here on out, there's, like I said, there's at least a couple overlaps on my list because BC put them a little bit lower on his. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have some of the same ones when we get to those top 2 or 3 spots.
Yeah.
So rolling into my top 5, I did have Sherri Martel in this spot. Echoing everything you guys previously said, you look at the way she interacted as a manager in so many storylines, like the Flair and Hogan story, and then Flair and Sting first, then Flair and Hogan. And like BC said, she was a trailblazer. We wouldn't have people like Alita if it wasn't for Sherri. You know what I mean? Women especially weren't bumping the way she was willing to work back then. And you hear, if you listen to women's wrestlers a lot of times, especially in the 80s, they talk about how when they were trained, there weren't a whole lot of women wrestlers. They would have to bring in enhancement talent from wherever they were at if they could find somebody, and they would keep masks back there in case they had to do back-to-back matches so they could put somebody in a mask so it would be the same 2 people on the card. And Sherri was one of those people who kind of broke that glass ceiling in a lot of ways because she was like, fuck it, like I'll take the bump from a man if I have to take the bump from a man, so that's why I put her where she is because I feel like the women that trailblazed in those territory days and those WCW days are the reason why you've got Lita's and your Becky Lynch's and your Trish's. They all came from your Sherri's and your Medusas and stuff like that. So that's why I put Sherri at number 5 on my list.
Mm-hmm.
BC, who's 5 on yours?
For me, it's Paul Ellering. Obviously, just because of the Road Warriors, like we talked about before, the success they had, just this badass team that nobody had seen in wrestling before, anything like that. I mean, coming in and squashing everybody, and this guy had control over them. So yeah, and the realism that he brought as like in life manager.
Agreed. You got anything to throw in on Mr. Ellering, DadHat?
No, I think we touched base on him.
Same. That number 4 spot, like I said, some of these are probably going to rattle off fairly quickly now we get to the top. Woman. I put her in my 4 spot. Like I said, the adoring fan to the backstabbing temptress, like what she was as the character. And like I said, you talk about everything before WCW up till the end of it. You see it. She's one of those people like Sherri. She was involved with the Horsemen. She was involved with Sullivan. She was involved with Doom. Like she had so many check marks along her pedigree and career that, especially if you look at women's managers and valets, she has to be on the Mount Rushmore of women's managers and valets. So that's why I put her in my top 4.
Yeah, the only thing I left out when I was talking about her before is also the interplay that you would have with Mean Gene and all these different interviews too. Yeah. Is always good for a laugh.
All right, who you got in the 4 spot?
For me, it is Mr. Paul E. Dangerously in number 4.
Ooh.
And again, just taking his WCW career into play here. But starting off in '88 with the original Midnight Express, that feud that they had with the Cornette's version of Midnight Express, his feud with Missy Hyatt, all these different crazy matches that he had. And then, of course, the Dangerous Alliance. I mean, one of the greatest stables that really never got utilized like they should have, to be quite honest.
I put them in a list of, Vince, right? From Smacking It Raw with Matt. Yeah. I put Dangerous Alliance in a greatest factions of all time list, and he was like, I like how you slid that one in there. And I was like, dude, go watch some fucking old school WCW. Dangerous Alliance were beasts that just never got over. So I love that you bring them up.
Yeah, nobody talks about them enough. I mean, nowadays some people mention it, but they only mention it because of Austin and Rude. But really, that whole conglomerate was just amazing. Arn and Zbyszko together, Medusa, who could be a valet plus be a killer against the women. The whole feud that Medusa and Heyman had afterwards, and then of course Rude and Austin. I mean, it was just such an amazing stable that should have done so much more. But the problem was they didn't have the opponents they needed at that time. So yeah, as far as Paulie Dangerously in WCW, he had a pretty damn good run, and then of course he'll go on to do not bad for himself.
I still want that Paulie Dangerously figure that is out now. Like it's WCW Paulie Dangerously with the giant phone. I want that figure.
Oh yeah, and of course he brings a
ponytail.
brick with him, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna save my Paulie. He's coming. He's coming. DadHat, you want to chime in now on Paulie?
Yeah, Paulie. I am such a huge like Dangerous Alliance fan. Like it, I don't know. Like to me, it was that cool group. Like when I was watching it, like that's the faction I want to be in. That's where I want to be if I was in the storyline. And I loved him, and that's probably why I was such an ECW mark, because I knew that he was tied into it, and why when he finally showed up in like later on in WWE, like why I was such a fan, and I'm still just a fan. And like, look, dude can read the phone book, and I'm gonna be like, that's the best freaking promo ever. Don't care. But I loved him, and I thought that I don't know, he was just different. It was like, okay, yes, I knew WCW was the Southern wrestling, and Will and I talk about that a lot, compared to like WWF and being, entertainment. But Paulie Dangerously was in Southern wrestling, but brought this just attitude that made everybody else look foolish, and I loved it.
The Psycho Yuppie, as he was called.
Yeah.
Top 3. We made it. Top 3. My number 3, and I'm gonna probably still. I assume this one is coming up for you, BC Hunter, and that's Mr. Jim Cornette.
Yeah.
When you look at wrestling, love him or hate him for the person he is in and out of wrestling. He's abrasive. He's harsh. He's challenging. He's, if you disagree with him, you're automatically wrong. But those are some of the same characteristics why 30 years ago we praised him and rose him to the heights of where he was at in wrestling, was because he was, when he first started and he broke in, he was Mama Cornette's baby boy, and he was the rich, spoiled kid with a trust fund and a fucking tennis racket. And somehow, he still made it through the ranks and still did it. He was one of those marks before marks was a thing that everybody called. He lied to get into the venue so he could take photographs. He lied to the wrestler so he could interview him and take photographs. And he the quintessential lie, cheat, and steal to get ahead in the wrestling business, because in the 70s and 80s when he was breaking in, that's what you had to do in some ways, especially if you weren't a worker. So he's that self-made mama's boy. And that's kind of what I loved about who Jim Cornette is as a manager. And you're not even talking about the people that he actually worked with. You know what I mean? I talked about the shoot fall and the scaffold match with him. I talking about Paulie and busting him open. I've got the Jim Cornette in the white suit with the blood stains. I've got that action figure. You know what I mean? Like, thank you, fuck you, bye. I'm here for Jim Cornette. Number 3 on my all-time greatest managers for WCW list.
Yeah, Cornette is like, again, whether you love him, whether you hate him and everything, you look at him as just a manager. Can bump like no other.
He was literally, he trained people. He's one of those who can do and those who can't teach. Yeah. Cornette was never a physical worker, but for some reason in his mind, he could teach people how to wrestle. And there was just something about how his brain worked, man. He was a genius inside of wrestling. And
his facial expressions, he's just made for television wrestling. Like that can't, like the facial expressions that and knowing where the cameras were and just all of that. Like Cornette as a manager and as a character has to be in your top 10.
Agreed. Like, it's hard. And like I said, I figure I probably stole a little bit of thunder from BC, but he took Jimmy Hart from me.
Well, yeah, well, I'll say my piece on Cornette. He's my number 2, actually. I'll go into my 3 in a second, but I would have loved to put him at number 1, but I had a real debate with that one. But I will say that I have a non-sexual crush on Jim Cornette. I mean, just he is wrestling. He is Southern wrestling, and he is not only an amazing manager, he's an amazing mind. Everybody talks about the genius of Paul Heyman, but this guy is a genius as well as far as getting heat, booking heat, knowing what to do as far as setting up a match, setting up an angle and everything like that. I think too many people are now looking back on Jim Cornette, unfortunately, with this eye of his hatred for AEW, and they're really letting that cloud what his career span is, and that's why Heyman's getting pushed up above him, because Heyman's still going active. They're not hearing Heyman give his opinion on AEW, so who knows? Heyman might feel the same way, which I wouldn't be surprised based on how he's learned from Cornette and stuff like that. But Cornette is amazing. Like, I will listen to his 2 podcasts and beg for 4 more hours each of them every time I listen to them, because they're so good. It's a history lesson rolled up with an education when you listen to it. And let's not even talk about what he did as a manager. I mean, the Midnight Express, he's going in the ring, announcing his own team. That wasn't done before. Using music that was hardly done before, but he picks a really cool entrance song for him. He's holding a boombox up to a microphone to make sure it's played. I literally just 2 nights ago watched Mid-South Wrestling from '84, the episode after they tarred and feathered Magnum TA, and him standing there with Bill Watts, and you can literally see Bill Watts wants to slap him across the face because he is that much of a heat-seeking missile that he is driving Watts out of his mind. And this is kayfabe, and he still got Watts so boiled up. He's just, again, I keep saying this is what wrestling needed at the time. It could use a little shot of it in this age. And I wish people would realize these people are doing a performance, and this is what you need. You need bad guys in this performance to get you to want to go to the arena to watch them lose. And unfortunately, it seems like we're getting a little bit too political correct with everything. We're getting a little bit too butthurt over stuff, and just learn from this person how to book something and how to make things work. But yeah, I could go on for days about Cornette.
You said he was number 2, so you still got to give me your number 3 then.
Yeah, number 3. I mentioned her earlier. It's Baby Doll.
Okay.
Short run, but it was good at the time. That's for sure. And again, she fit perfectly into that mold in the old NWA style of things. She was perfect with Tully, the perfect 10, as they say. She could handle herself. She took a slap pretty good from both Dusty and Tully. Yeah, it was. And then when she ended up coming back and turning on Dusty and going with the Horseman and her alongside Flair, just seemed to work. And I don't know, I know, again, it wasn't a long ride as far as her run, but man, if you listen to those crowds in Jim Crockett Promotions in '85 and '86 when she's at ringside, they are ready to riot when she's doing anything. So anybody who can get that much heat, I'm going to give a lot of credit for. And again, she was one of the early predecessors for this whole valet role, and really a predecessor for somebody like a Chyna or, somebody that's really physical, that is not your damsel in distress, as opposite to what Elizabeth was. So I'll give her props. Baby Doll's up there.
It's an interesting pick for that high up on a top 10. I like the reasons why you picked her, though. That's the same of the reasons that I put Woman in my top 4 here.
Yeah.
A lot of the same reasons. Baby Doll was also, she was married to Sam Houston at one point.
She was, yeah. That's what got her fired.
Yeah, the lesser known brother of Jake the Snake. Yeah. So when you look at everything involved with that family, she's one of those people, like I said, just going through our lists, like the people who just, when they work with greats throughout their careers, how can you not put them on this list? And Baby Doll's one of those. She didn't make mine. When I was looking at the women, she would probably be in my honorable mention on the women's things, but I felt like Sherri and Woman, like both of those were like up there. So I think it's super cool that you put Baby Doll ahead of both Sherri and Woman on your list. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've got 3 women in my list because they were all just amazing, but they're all tough. And they're all, it's not, that's why I didn't put Elizabeth on. Like, comparing the 2, she brought way more to the table, if you ask me.
I've got 3 women on my list as well. So that's what I'm saying. Like, they were very well represented in this point in wrestling. DadHat, you got anything on Baby Doll?
Baby Doll, like you said, heat-seeking missile. I had the privilege of interviewing and getting in contact and then bringing on Sam Houston to the Wrestle Talk Wolfpack. It was like the first big interview that I brought to the table when we were starting off with that show. And it was one of those things where like I wanted to be respectful and not go into his past marriage, but like as many I had so many questions I was curious about Baby Doll as I was with Sam, but I was like, I'm gonna be respectful. I'm not gonna bring up, just like I wouldn't want somebody to be like interviewing me and like, so tell me about how your ex, like with your ex and blah 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 stuff like that. No, I'm not gonna do that. But Baby Doll,
how was that
just,
drug addiction? You know, like how the fuck do you work that in there, right?
Yeah, like she was just. I mean, how you use that comparison, BC, with like for China and everything, like it's perfect. It's perfect. Like Baby Doll is not like, and she's doing all the con circuits and everything. Like everything that comes through the Carolinas, I see her, like the Gathering, WrestleCade, like all those. She's always one of the first ones I see announced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, number 2. My number 2 is the mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. Come on, guys. You saw it coming. And listening to my top 10 and who I said was in my, some of my greatest of all time, you probably guess who my number 1 is. But when you look at Jimmy Hart, and like I said, you take into WCW that little bit, that precursor leading into it, the territories, and then WCW, and then everything going into WWF, there's a lot that can be covered. But when you think about the true WCW sense, yeah, Jimmy Hart might not have had the best WCW run, but leading into it, man, like I said, he touched so many people when he was going through Memphis and stuff, when he came through, and when he did it, the way he did it was he built it all on being Jimmy Hart. You know what I mean? Like he was just that person. When they talk about taking your personality and turning it up to 11, that's who Jimmy Hart was. He just was that guy. And then the older he's got, he's tried to stay as true to his form. He's been strong in the community. So his WCW roles, maybe not great, but I think if you take his territory stuff and his WCW stuff, that's why I put him so high. And the man got to talk to me when I was stark ass naked in the hospital right after I took a round of chemo. My old co-host Bobby called me from Hogan's Hangout, and it was like, 11 o'clock in the morning. I was like, why is Bobby FaceTiming me? Like something's got to be wrong. Like, and I answer the phone as I'm getting out of a shower, finishing up my thing, and Jimmy Hart's on the other line, and he was like, "What's up, baby?" And I was like, "Oh my god, of course this is how this works." So, but I think Jimmy Hart, he's definitely one of those top 4, top 5 all-time managers in WCW. I put him at number 2 for me because of who he was before WCW, and then him just carrying that mantle for the longevity as long as he did. So I put him up there. You said Cornette was your number 2, right?
He is, yeah.
Okay. You want to go ahead and fill anything left on Cornette, or do you want to go ahead and drop your number 1 pick?
Well, I'll just say too about Jimmy Hart, just his Legends House run could put him in the list as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, I didn't even give you guys a chance to talk. I was like, Jimmy Hart, done. Fuck it, move on. No. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you guys off on the Jimmy Hart stuff.
That was it for me, though.
Yeah.
I mean, you said it all. And ironically enough, Jimmy Hart would make my Mount Rushmore. My number 1 probably wouldn't even make my Mount Rushmore. But as far as looking at WCW, it's all discombobulated,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed. All right, sir. Now, number 1.
Yeah. Should we both say it at the same time?
Okay. I think you've already said my number 1.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have a different one then. Okay.
Yeah, you go
all
first.
Right. Mine's JJ Dillon.
Okay.
And again, it's I wouldn't even have JJ on my Mount Rushmore, but I'm looking at NWA WCW run.
Yeah.
I mean, he ran with the Horsemen, the most successful group of all time. Even better than that NWO, even better than them, right? I mean, he was in War Games. He was, I really do think he was kind of the inspiration of the advocate role that Paul Heyman has taken on. He was intelligent. You had a group of 4 of the best talkers in the business, and you still had a manager. What the hell? Why do you even have it? But yet he didn't seem out of place. He really didn't. He seemed like he was integral to that. And let's not forget, above all that, he managed Nature Boy Buddy Landell. I mean, come on. So, yeah, JJ's in my list just for the fact that his group of wrestlers are the most successful wrestlers of all. So that's why I'm going to give him the nod. Otherwise, I probably would have put Cornette at number 1.
Preach. Everything you just said
Yeah.
makes me go, okay, I should put JJ Dillon on my top 10. And I feel like an idiot. I was playing on like, I was doing that hipster Will thing where I was like, man, think about everything, this person did. So, there was some left field, but I mean, I respect the shit out of who JJ Dillon was. Like I said, he climbed in War Games back when managers had to wrestle two in there. So you give him props for that. You're 100% right. He was that mouthpiece when he needed to be. He was just that mean scumbag when he needed to be. Like, he filled so many roles in wrestling that he deserves, a spot on just about anybody's great list. So
and he lasted until even the late 90s. I mean, he was like the spokesperson for the quote unquote championship committee. Like, I mean, he was still there as an authority figure, like in the middle of the Monday Night Wars.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he brought class to everything, it felt like, too. Yeah.
Number one for me,
Paulie Dangerously.
100%. Because of the reasons I've been preaching this whole time. You look at everything Paul did, coming through the territories and learning from Dusty to who he became, to go into his roles, the Dangerous Alliance stuff. When you think about the fact of everything that he had in his pocket there with Rude and Austin, but not just that, the fact that he was ahead of his time. We talked about the cell phones and the shenanigans in the match, and he had no problems whacking somebody over the head with that brick. You know what I mean? And then you look at what he did after that, and he transitioned into ECW and being a promoter, and he built an empire in his mother's basement like every good Jewish boy does. Like, I can say it. It's okay. I'm part of the tribe. But that's the point. Like, he fought tooth and nail the whole time to get there. You know what I mean? Like, he's one of those guys who fought from the bottom, and, talked about it with your Cornettes and stuff. He lied, cheat, and stilled so he could find a way to get his foot in the door. When you think about wrestling, just a mind and stuff for the business, you have to think about Paulie. And that's why I said he's moved ahead of Cornette on my all-time great list, is because he has continued to push on now. When you look at evolution of the business, Paulie's been able to successfully evolve every single decade that he's been a part of, starting in the 80s and all the way through today. And he's done nothing but be successful in everything he touches to gold. So Paulie, number one.
I agree with you. He'd be my number one.
So, gentlemen, we did it. I think we did all. And look, right at an hour. Look, It's almost like we've all done this before.
Right?
Look at that. But I think we've done all. So what's up?
Well, can I just make a couple of honorable mentions, because I really agonized over putting them on there. Oliver Humperdinck. He's a guy that could have made my list for the House of Humperdinck back in the day in the 80s. I know it's old, but he also was with the Freebirds in the 90s, and he was with Page and all that stuff. He could even throw Dallas Page on there, honestly.
DDP, his wife.
Yeah, Kimberly. Yeah.
Harley Race, a fantastic manager.
I was going to mention Harley Race. I mean, his run with Vader, are you kidding me? I mean, he's somebody I just mentioned as the MVP of the last pay-per-view that I just covered during the Monday Night War, Sonny Ono. That guy managed every Japanese person that ever came into wrestling, it seemed like, for WCW. I had Parker on there. I would love to put Kevin Sullivan, but the Dungeon of Doom was so horrible I couldn't even add him on there. And my other question was, would Eric Bischoff be considered a manager when he was with the NWO?
Ooh.
Because you'd have to throw him on that list if he was. But to me, he was the brass, not the manager.
Yeah.
That's the way I always viewed him. He was the power. Yeah. Every time he was presented on screen, he was that sniveling guy with all the power who had the muscle behind him. We haven't got to NWO yet.
Yeah. And one more lady I'll throw in there, Medeja. I don't know. It's always Medeja with Scott Steiner. Anybody, again, if you're controlling a freak like Scott Steiner, come on.
That's a great another like Paul Ellering kind of cat. You know what I mean? The guy who didn't look like he should be able to keep it all under control, but he was able to anyways.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys. Well, that's it. We've done all the damage we can do. BC Hunter, why don't you tell everybody where to find you and all of your projects you got going on right now?
Yeah, you got an hour for that, but from the audio podcast version, since we're talking about WCW and World Championship Wreckage, I'm actually doing Wrestling with the War on the audio podcast. So I'm running through the Monday Night War right from 95 to 2001. just about to start into 1996 right now. So if you want to check that out, 1 week is a recap of some of the Raws and Nitros, and then we'll do a recap of the guests with the pay-per-views. So having a little bit of fun with that. And then over on YouTube, I've got 2 channels for you to check out. If you want to check out Wrestling with the 80s, that's my channel. Is dedicated on everything 80s wrestling. It's taken off really well for me right now. So come on board, join the fun. I just did a spotlight on Magnum TA, and then I had a Ted the Hillbilly Heel over to do a what if episode on what if Magnum hadn't had that car wreck, and man, that's getting some good reaction, and that was a lot of fun to do, So that
shout out to Ted. I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. I love Ted. If you don't listen to the Hill Truth podcast, what are you doing with your life? Go listen to Ted.
Yes, we all have to promote him by law because he's not on social media right now.
And he's still pumping out episodes, churning them out. Too.
I know. And then the last thing on YouTube as well, I have a Wrestling with the Truth channel as well, where it's more modern stuff. So if you want to come over there for my modern take, but either or, you got the old school and the modern.
Before I hand it back off to you, DadHat, I am the Will Gray. I'm the host and lead writer for BotchBotsAndChairShots.com. You can find me anywhere at BotchBotsAndChairShots.com. You can check the link tree at the Will Gray for all of my shenanigans. DadHat, it's back to you. You're at the helm again.
All righty. Well, I appreciate BCU joining us. This was fun. I feel like honestly we could have even done a part 2 on this, which we might have to revisit just to go a little more in depth in some of these. But hey, we still got a lot of stuff to cover in WCW. But this is only one episode that we're going to release this week. So I kind of did my plugs at the beginning of the episode. So if you gentlemen don't have anything else, I'm going to leave us with the wise words that we leave every episode with from our friend, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah, baby, I got one more thing to say. Your gas tank is full. Your dipstick is in. Your windows washed. Y'all come back and see me again.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.